Participants. We're going to kick off this webinar now, which is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a couple of pieces of information. One is that all of the attendees will be muted. However, you can participate through a Q&A at the bottom. So basically enter your information and we'll work our way through the questions. Probably at the end of the webinar, we'll go through those and look for good questions to ask the panelists today. We'll also be putting postings of announcements and links in the chat function, so you can keep an eye on that to see if there are some links that would be useful for you. My name is Des Woodworth. I'm an Economic Development Officer with the City of San Jose. This workshop is part of a series being organized by the City of San Jose. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, and it's entitled America's Rescue Plan, What's Next for Business. As you may have guessed, this is actually part of what's next for business, but there are a lot of other things that are being rolled out at the federal level, and that would be a good opportunity to get some heads up about what those additional pieces are. So I'll post that link to the chat location. Today, I'm very pleased to be able to host Marlo Schindler. She's the Assistant District Director at the Small Business Administration. She's in charge of lender relations and economic development for the San Francisco district. She'll be addressing some of the key issues on the $16 billion Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. So Marlo, thank you so much for being here. Really looking forward to hearing the information that you have. I do know that there are a lot of details which are still coming out from the federal government, but the speed at which you guys have turned this around is really remarkable. And I know that we're very eager to hear the pieces that you can share about. So take it away, Marlo. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Des. And you can see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. So as was mentioned, my name is Marlo Schindler. I'm the lead lender relations specialist at the San Francisco District Office of the SBA. San Francisco District Office, but we cover all the Bay Area counties and the coastal counties from Santa Cruz to the Oregon border. So presumably everyone on this call is from San Jose, but if you're from slightly outside that area, we're your local district office as well. And today we're just going to be focusing on the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant. So just one program. Normally, when I give these presentations, I'm doing kind of an overview of like PPP, IDLE, Targeted IDLE Advance, and then this is kind of something that's been on the side that's like, oh, that's upcoming. But we're finally kind of getting to the point where this is going to be going live on April 8th. So we have a date that we're working towards, and we're starting to promote it more. So a little bit of an overview of what is the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant, or SVOG, as I might refer to it throughout the presentation. It was a program established through the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, and it was amended by the American Rescue Plan Act to provide over $16 billion in economic relief to target industries. It was at one point called Save Our Stages, and so that nomenclature is still, I think, in some people's head, but that bill that was introduced didn't end up getting through. It kind of got subsumed by the Economic Aid Relief Bill, so that's kind of why it's now the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant and not Save Our Stages any longer. Eligible applicants may qualify for grants equal to 45% of their gross earned revenue, with a maximum amount available for a single grant award of $10 million. And $2 billion is reserved for eligible applicants with up to 50 full-time employees, so 50 employees or less. So of that 16 billion, 2 billion is set aside for the smallest venues. I'll just, there was another SVOG webinar today. It was hosted at the national level, and they went over the application process. They covered what documentation eligible entities will need to apply for an SVOG. They gave some insight on what the SVOG application process will look like and provided other information. The webinar was recorded, and I believe they're going to post it on YouTube. But if you signed up on Eventbrite and you got the link to attend, and for some reason you weren't able to attend it live, I just checked an hour ago before getting on this call. The link still links to the recording. So that's how Teams live events often work with SBA. So if you have, if you signed up, but for some reason missed it, or if you signed up, watched it, and feel like you forgot something or would like to rewatch it, that recording's already available there. But I think it will be made available on YouTube and put on SBA.gov shortly. I don't know if that's today or tomorrow, but if you missed it, don't worry, it was recorded. And I'll start with some of the takeaways that they mentioned on the call. So the first and foremost, a question that we've been getting for 3.5 months is when will SBA begin accepting applications? And the answer is now Thursday, April 8th. So at this point, you can sign up for the portal, and that'll be on the next slide. But all the portal does is ask a little bit of preliminary information. You can't actually begin filling out your application yet. So the application itself isn't available, but it will be on the 8th. So it'll become available the same day that we begin accepting applications. So all potential SVOG applicants must register in the federal government's System for Awards Management, also known as SAM.gov. SAM.gov is not run by the SBA. So I know a lot of small business owners, nonprofits have had some difficulty with the application process for registering for SAM.gov. If you do, there's information on the website that I think they have an 800 number. They also have an email address that you can send your questions to. If you can try asking us at SBA, if it's a relatively simple or common mistake or issue that you're having, we might be able to help, but we have no visibility into the system. So I can't give a status update. I can't really help walk you through the application process because I can't see the system. But we do have a video tutorial on SBA.gov. So if you haven't yet and you're about to, or you're going through the SAM.gov registration process, I would recommend that video specifically. And this other website, sba.gov/SVO grant, that is going to be where you're going to find basically all things SVOG, everything, the FAQs, link to the portal, the video tutorials, a preliminary application checklist, and eligibility requirements. So that's really your best source for program information. I mentioned the SVOG portal. If you want to go straight there rather than going to the SBA.gov page I mentioned on the previous slide. And I think Des is going to share this in the chat, because this is really, if you haven't already, if you're thinking about applying for an SVOG and you haven't already, please go, right now or maybe after this presentation and register with the portal. And when everything goes live, the people who have signed up will get that information simultaneously. So if you want to be kind of in the know, one of the first to know, then sign up now. So who can apply for an SVOG? The eligible entities include live venue operators or promoters, theatrical producers, live performing arts organizations, relevant museum operators, zoos and aquariums, motion picture theater operators, talent representatives, and then each business entity owned by an eligible entity that also meets the eligibility requirements. On top of kind of those types of organizations, other requirements that I think you'll actually see a couple times in this presentation, because it is important and I just want to make sure that I reiterate, must have been in operation as of February 29th, 2020. And that is something that you will have to be able to prove with documentation. A venue or promoter who received a PPP loan on or after December 27th, 2020 will have the SVOG reduced by the PPP loan amount. This is also something we'll cover in a couple of follow-up slides, but I was talking with Des before this got started. These programs have been kind of ever changing. So there was a time where the if you had applied for a PPP loan after December 27th, that disqualified you from receiving an SVOG. That is no longer the case. It doesn't disqualify you, but your SVOG will be reduced by the amount of the PPP loan that you did receive. And going in the other direction, if you have received an SVOG, you can no longer apply for PPP. So that is different from what the rules were even, I think, a month ago. So grant amount. Grant amounts will reflect either of the following instances. So this is, the first one is for an eligible entity in operation on January 1st, 2019. Grants will be for an amount equal to 45% of their 2019 gross earned revenue, or $10 million, whichever is less. And then for an eligible entity that began operation after January 1st, 2019, grants will be for the average monthly gross earned revenue for each full month you are in operation during 2019, multiplied by 6, or $10 million, whichever is less. How to apply. Those who have suffered the greatest economic loss will be the first applications processed under the following schedule. And I just want to point out that this says processed. So if you are like, oh, I'm not a first priority grant recipient, I would be second priority. That doesn't mean like hang out and don't do your application for 2 weeks until second priority starts. Everyone is going to submit their applications. I think, start on April 8th, as soon as the floodgates open. So, but when it comes time for the SBA to actually make the grants, that's when the kind of first priority, second priority, third priority, and supplemental funding timing will come into effect. So I can't say right now when that first grant will actually be awarded. So we don't have the timeline for like, this will be May 1st, and then this will be May 15th, or whatever the dates might end up being. But this is how kind of the priority of funding is going to break down. So the first 14 days of grant awards, entities that suffered a 90% or greater revenue loss between April 2020 through December 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second priority, so that following 2 weeks, will be entities that suffered a 70% or greater revenue loss between April 2020 through December 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Third priority, so now it's 4 weeks after the grants have begun being made, entities that suffered a 25% or greater earned revenue loss between 1 quarter of 2019 and the corresponding quarter of 2020. And then supplemental funding, this will be available after all priority periods have passed. So there isn't necessarily a guarantee that the supplemental funding will happen. This is all based on that $16 billion that we got from Congress, and there has been a lot of interest in this program. But assuming we get through the first, second, and third priority, and there is still money available, recipients of first, second, and third priority round awards who suffered a 70% or greater revenue loss for the most recent calendar quarter as of April 1st, 2021 or later would be eligible for that supplemental funding. So allowable use of funds, it's not a free-for-all. And there is an expectation, and especially if you did get on the call earlier today, then you did hear you need to, and I have a slide at the end about record retention. You will have to be able to show that funds were used for these specific expenses. Something else, normally I'm dealing with lenders, not grant programs, but loan programs. But with the lenders, we always tell them to like document their file, document. And now you as a potential grant recipient, same advice, document. You could be audited. So you just want to be prepared. So the specific expenses include payroll costs, rent payments, utility payments, scheduled mortgage payments, scheduled debt payments. Again, not including prepayment of principal or any indebtedness incurred in the ordinary course of business prior to February 15th, 2020. Worker protection expenditures, payments to independent contractors not to exceed $100,000 in annual compensation per contractor, other ordinary and necessary business expenses, including maintenance costs, administrative costs, including fees and licensing, state and local taxes and fees, operating leases in effect as of February 15th, 2020. Again, this is just something that it is a totally different program from PPP, but this is something that we've seen come up with a lot of PPP borrowers, is that you need to have proof that the lease was in effect as of February 15th, 2020, or that would be ineligible. Insurance payments, advertising, production, transportation, and capital expenditures related to producing a theatrical or live performing arts production, although that may not be the primary use of funds. And there are a lot of terms there that might have a plain language meaning and might have a different meaning in terms of the grant. So I would encourage you to follow up and take a look at the frequently asked questions, which does include some terms definitions. Not allowable uses of funds. So grantees may not use award funds to buy real estate, to make payments on loans originated after February 15th, 2020, to make investments or loans, to make contributions or other payments to or on behalf of political parties, political committees, or candidates for election. Again, this is a federal grant program. These are federal dollars, so just want to have that separation. And then any other use prohibited by the administrator. So kind of a catch-all for any updates that may be made to the program later, I assume. Grantee record keeping. So I mentioned this earlier. This might not be your standard business practice, but this is something that you want to be real aware of for the next 4 years. Grantees will be required to maintain documentation demonstrating their compliance with the eligibility and other requirements of the SVOG program. They must retain employment records for 4 years following their receipt of a grant and retain all other records for 3 years. So again, we're the federal government, sometimes we move slowly, so it wouldn't be impossible that you would get that call 2.5 years from now, 3 years, asking for records as someone is getting around to auditing this program. So just, be aware of that. So video tutorials, I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what's available on the website. So these are all relatively short, so none of these is going to take a lot of your time to watch, but you might find them useful depending on how you learn. If you're better with reading, then definitely go and read the FAQs, but if you prefer audio visual, these are available to you. And it also, as you can see, breaks down eligibility for the different venue types. I've mentioned the FAQ a bunch of times. I did go through it before this presentation and was like, okay, I'll pull out some of the FAQs that I think are the most likely to come up, but it's 26 pages. There's a lot. So really, this is just kind of the table of contents to give you a sense for what topics are covered. So eligibility for all applicants, and then specifically for museums or movie theater operators or live venue operators or promoters. As I mentioned, the definitions, that's a really helpful section. Again, you might have kind of your plain language assumption of what a term means, but you want to make sure that you are going with the government definition of that word. Questions about the application process, the use of funds, business size and employees, revenue, subsidiaries and affiliates, and then the supplemental phase. And it's long, but it's not exhaustive. So I mean, we've already had people who've both listened to the webinar this morning and already read through the whole FAQs and still have questions. And that is, you're not, if that's you as well, you're not alone. As Des mentioned at the top, we are awaiting further guidance, even though this is going live on the 8th. There are still tweaks being made to the program, so don't get frustrated if you can't get a straight answer, because the answer literally might not exist yet. But as we get a little farther along, hopefully that'll be sorted out and that those answers will be available. The preliminary application checklist, I wanted to draw everyone's attention to this document, which is on sba.gov/SVO grant, because it's super useful, because I feel like a lot of the people who are reaching out to us want to do everything they can to prepare, so that as soon as they can actually submit their application, they can be one of the first, or they can be prepared. So this is a great, also lengthy document. So it's not a small number of things that you need to collect. So again, if you're thinking about applying for the SVOG, I would highly recommend checking out this checklist and starting to pull together the documents that you're going to need. So kind of first, this is a preliminary list. So again, even though we're, just over a week away from this, this document list isn't necessarily the final. Yeah, as the process is still under development, and this list is subject to further refinement. So do bear that in mind. If you end up preparing something or finding something and then you don't need to upload it, but this checklist isn't like a promise that this will be the application. Whatever comes out April 8th, that will supersede anything that came before, but it can't hurt to get these documents together. And all documents will need to be legible, and certification documents will need to be signed and dated. This is not necessarily also an all-inclusive list, so additional documents may be required to meet eligibility and compliance. Again, I won't be reviewing these grant applications. I don't review PPP loan applications. And yet at times I've had reason that I've seen different PPP loan applications or forgiveness applications. Just pay attention to the legible part. Like, really cross your T's and dot your I's. There's going to be tens of thousands of venues applying for this grant. There's going to be a small team at SBA that is going to be working on it. There's going to be, a new system that's set up. But, if you're putting in, a DUNS number, a tax ID number, anything like that, triple check that you didn't transpose any of the numbers. Like, it's way easier if you get everything right the first time. Like, you don't want the reason that you get kicked out of the queue to be that you didn't do a great job of scanning a document and it was not legible, or that you forgot to sign something. It's going to be way easier if everything is complete and accurate the first time than if you send something in. And I'm sure there will be a process for like, oh, I need to amend this, or I needed to upload this rather than this. Oh, I uploaded 2018 instead of 2019. Like, it's going to be easier for you if everything is as buttoned up as possible in the application process. So this is a chart you can find, I think, on a couple different SBA presentations. So we'll mainly just look at the SVOG kind of column and row. So this is how PPP, SVOG, and IDLE interact with each other, or don't. So as was mentioned, an SVOG applicant may apply if they received a PPP loan prior to applying for SVOG. If the PPP loan was received on or after December 27th, 2020, so basically anytime in 2021, the amount will be deducted from the SVOG. When it comes to SVOG and SVOG, yes, if you are an SVOG applicant and you want to apply for supplemental SVOG award, again, assuming that there are still funds available, then that is allowable. So it is possible to get more than one grant. And then SVOG and IDLE. So if you're an SVOG applicant, you may apply for SVOG, but you cannot be, but it cannot be used for the same purpose or costs as IDLE. And then if you are lucky enough to become a recipient of the SVOG, as I mentioned earlier, you may not apply for PPP after receiving the SVOG. So if you applied for PPP, received it before SVOG, fine. If you've received SVOG, then you may not apply for PPP. And then you may apply for IDLE, but you cannot use it for the same purpose and cost as SVOG. Yeah, I just will say, if you haven't already applied for IDLE and you're eligible, IDLE being the Economic Injury Disaster Loan available through our Office of Disaster Assistance, I would recommend applying. And then I don't know if everyone saw the press release. You know, this is obviously something we stay right on top of, but doesn't necessarily make it out to the wider public. But the amount of IDLE, COVID-19 IDLE loans was capped at 150 for the last year, and that cap has just been raised to 500. So if you maxed out your IDLE and you got 150, but your business would have been eligible for more, you can now petition to not just yet. We've made the announcement that you can do it, but we haven't yet, I think, set up the process for folks who want to get an increased amount, but that should be happening soon. So that difference between 150 and 500 is also going to be a big deal for a lot of businesses. So I'll just go over, yeah, so there's kind of the eligibility requirements for any type of business or nonprofit that they have to satisfy. And then there are another set of specific eligibility requirements depending on the type of organization that you are running. So I'll just start with the general requirements, and then if there's questions in the Q&A, we can go through maybe some of the other slides as well. But since I don't know exactly who's on the call, I'm not, you know, I don't want to go through all of them in case they're not relevant for this audience. But as I mentioned before, must be fully operational on February 29th, 2020 to qualify. Had gross earned revenue during any of the first, second, third, or fourth quarters in 2020 that demonstrated not less than a 25% deduction from the gross earned revenue of such business during the corresponding quarter in 2019. Ownership restrictions. I think this is, you know, us seeing some things that popped up in PPP and trying to correct on those, make sure that the same problems that we had with PPP don't happen with this new program. Is not listed on a stock exchange or majority owned and controlled by an entity listed on a stock exchange, and then does not have or is not majority owned and controlled by an entity with all three of the following characteristics. So 1, owns or operates venues, relevant museums, motion picture theaters, or talent agencies or talent management companies in more than one country, and owns or operates venues, relevant museums, motion picture theaters, or talent agencies or talent management companies in more than 10 states, and employs more than 500 employees as of February 29th, 2020, determined on a full-time equivalent basis. So again, has to have all three of those to not be eligible. So it's okay if you have one or two. And then not majority owned or controlled by an entity that received more than 10% of gross revenue from federal funding during 2019, excluding amounts received by such businesses under the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, an act I'll admit I am not that familiar with, so I'm not sure what the exceptions that allows are. And then finally, prohibited activities. So does not present live performances of a prurient sexual nature, or 2, derive directly or indirectly more than de minimis gross revenue through the sale of products or services or the presentation of any depictions or displays of a prurient sexual nature. So with that, like I said, I have it's kind of some additional slides on eligibility requirements. But I will say before I have Des unmute himself and join me again for kind of a discussion of Q&A, we at the San Francisco district office, or at any district office, we will not be making eligibility determinations. So, you know, if you come and you give me a description of your business and say, am I eligible? I can't answer that. You know, whether I said it orally or in writing, if you tried to take that to the Office of Disaster Assistance, which is actually making eligibility determinations, it would mean nothing to them. They're the ones who are going to make the eligibility determinations. So, hopefully there's no one asked that directly in the Q&A, but yeah, that's not something that I can do. That's something that is done by a totally different office. And then in terms of like getting support in putting together your application packet, going back to the preliminary application checklist, this is kind of where I would send you if you had questions about trying to put together your application. It's not something that I could get into the weeds with you and be like, oh yes, that is what they meant by X. However, we are in the process of training up some of our resource partners. And I don't know if anyone on the call has had an occasion to work with SCORE, SBDC, or Women's Business Center in the past, but all three of them are getting some additional training, and they've already gotten money. I know they got some money from the CARES Act and the Economic Aid Act, and I think they got American Rescue Plan money as well to like specifically help to promote these programs. So we're in the process of trying to identify a couple of counselors at I think both the Silicon Valley SCORE and the Silicon Valley SBDC, so that there will be not even just an organization, but like specific counselors that we can point you to who can walk through this process. Traditionally, those resource partners, we have helped people put together loan packages. So, you know, we goal them on their ability to help businesses get access to capital. But in the past, because we didn't have grant programs directly for business owners, this wasn't something that they were kind of necessarily doing a lot of, but some have worked with nonprofits in the past, so some are kind of familiar with the grant application process. But anyway, this is kind of one more thing that's like ongoing, that there'll be further information about it soon. So I don't have those people that I've identified for San Jose yet, but when I get them, I can share that with Des, or if anyone reaches out directly to Des, I'll make sure that he knows who at the resource partners are specifically working on this program.
Great, Marlo. Thank you so much. That's a big help to know that there will be specific individuals. Those are three really good organizations, and our local representation is quite good.
Yep.
They should be able to respond well and accurately. I've also shared in the chat their websites. So if you want to initiate contact with them prior to those specific relationships being set up between the SBA and those individual counselors, you can contact them early, and I'm sure that they'll add you to a list of people who they'll, if they don't have the immediate answer to what you're looking for, I'm sure they'll connect you up with the appropriate counselor at that point as well. There are two questions in the Q&A at the moment. Largely, they deal with the questions about fiscal versus calendar year. So I'm just going to read them off. When looking at revenue losses in 2019 quarters versus 2020 quarters, is that our fiscal quarters or calendar quarters?
Yes. This is, I'm going to look at the frequently asked questions.
And I'm thinking that some of that has to do with the question about the amount of revenue loss, because there's questions that have to, if you're losing a whole lot of revenue, then the criteria are different than if you've lost less revenue, in which case they're looking at one quarter at one point versus the same quarter in the subsequent period, presumably the one that the applicant is most interested in because it has the largest losses.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's, this is where I can't say what I believe. I would have to look up the actual reference in the FAQ, because I get in trouble, especially since this is being recorded, if I say something inaccurate. So this is one of those things where I would recommend looking at the frequently asked questions for how to calculate loss.
Okay, good enough. Let's see, and there's another one. Is an EIDL loan, not the grant, received in 2020 considered to be part of the entity's 2020 revenue when applying for the SVOG grant?
This is another one where I would refer, because I think they might have even mentioned this on the call today. So I would, let's see.
There's some possibility of the FAQ being updated if it's not current then with that information.
Yeah, because there are a lot of questions about what counts as like revenue.
Right.
And does that include other grants or is it earned revenue or gross revenue? And so those were addressed in the call today.
I do think that's a really good question because I know that there have been some allowances made for some of this stuff to be basically non-taxable. I don't know if that's true for the EIDL, but there, that's a good question and something that would make a lot of sense to have a close look for if Marlo isn't able to lay her finger on that specific information.
Let's see, yeah. How are earned revenue and gross earned revenue being defined by the SBA? Yeah, it doesn't go into the specifics about IDLE on the FAQs, but there is a definition of earned revenue and gross earned revenue and gross revenue. Let's see. Yeah, are donations contributions included in gross earned revenue? No, only earned revenue should be included in calculations of gross earned revenue. Unearned revenue, including donations and other gratuitous contributions, such as foundation grants and individual gifts, should not be included. That wasn't the question, but that is one of the things that's on the FAQ. Yeah, I'm sorry. I basically am going to keep referring people back to the FAQ for now.
Yeah.
There was an SVOG at SBA.gov website, I'm sorry, email address that was up, but they took that down. So I think for now, they just want everyone to sign up for the portal. And, if you want information, that's where they're going to be disseminating it to people that they know are like truly interested in the grant program.
That makes sense. I'm curious, in the event that someone makes an honest mistake in terms of their application, say for instance, they think that the EIDL, they conclude after looking into it that the EIDL won't be concluded in the revenue arrangements, but it turns out that that's inaccurate. There'll be a review process, presumably of some variety. The downside being, of course, that they could get hung up in the review process and then not make it across the goal line.
Yeah, it's difficult because, I mean, if this program kind of mirrors what's happened with PPP, there's going to be a lot of places where the business owner, nonprofit manager are going to be asked to certify that certain statements that they've made are true. And they're going to have to do that based on the guidance that is available to them at that time.
Sure. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And do you have a sense, you had mentioned earlier about the availability of individual counselors who will probably be scouring all of the documents and, combining all of this stuff so they can distribute it easily to people. Do you have a sense about the timing on that? Presumably it would happen shortly before the beginning of April so that they are in position to address things. But has anybody
Beginning of
given
April
you?
is Thursday, so
Yeah.
I don't know that it will happen before the beginning of April. But yes, later this week and early next week is when I believe the SCORE and SBDC counselors that have been identified will get additional training. So that is, I think they are trying to have that happen before April 8th.
Okay, great. Anonymous is actually sending a number of them. I'm not sure if it's the same anonymous or an additional person, but they're a 501c3 with a large historic venue that supports income from and is supported by incomes from events, meetings, performances across a spectrum of live cultural and other kinds of events. Since they've continued to have ongoing revenue at the building while they've been shuttered, they have been depleted their reserves. Are they eligible to apply for the SVO since 95% of our revenue income was lost? I think it would kind of depend on, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Marlo,
Yeah.
but I think a big portion of it has to do with the seats. As I recall, temporary seating isn't counted into the into things. So if it's a multi-use space where you can pull out all the chairs and make it into a ballroom, as opposed to if that were the case, and obviously we don't have the specifics, then I think that may be a factor.
Yeah, I mean, are we eligible to apply for the SVO since 90% of our rental income was lost? I mean, I like I said, I can't give eligibility determinations, so that's just something I'm not going to be able to do. I would recommend looking at the FAQs, and if you believe that you're eligible, or even, you know, if you think you might be eligible, sign up for the portal now so that when more information becomes available, you can submit. Literally, I'm not allowed to make eligibility determinations, so I apologize.
So my reading of it, and since I even though we're being recorded, I'm not with the SBA.
Yeah, you can say it whatever you want.
I will caution that there are some pretty strong specifics about who qualifies, and that includes fixed seating. So in the event that that it's a more flexible venue, it may be possible that it's not eligible to the degree that you would like it to be, since you've lost rental income as opposed to fixed venue and performance as this particular grant is applied to it. It may be that you can qualify for a smaller amount, but have a close look at those details, because I think that's where the specifics are going to be. All right, any other questions? Oh, looks like we got we got a thank you. That's
Okay.
Marlo, any parting shots, any things that you'd want to urge people to do? Or
yeah, I mean, I apologize for not being able to answer the questions that came in. I wish I had all the answers, but I think, you know, again, something that happens, something that I've seen with PPP and Targeted IDLE Advance, and now we're also gearing up for the Restaurant Revitalization Grant, is sometimes the news gets ahead of what's actually happening. So sometimes you'll hear that there's information available that just it's not available yet, either because a congressperson tweeted it, or, you know, even the White House sometimes will get a little bit ahead of us, and they'll say that something is available that's not. So then people get frustrated because they can't find that information. So I will just say that, like, literally everything that's available to you right now is, in regards to this grant, is on sba.gov/SVO grant. There is not additional information that is being held back from you. There's not information that someone has that you don't. Everything that's available it's public facing, and it's on a .gov website. That said, I think SBA is doing some, after this national webinar today that was open for everyone, I think there might be some webinars coming up with trade associations as well, being done by headquarters. So sometimes those, if you belong to a trade association and you see that there's going to be an SBA speaker, that might be an opportunity to try and ask a question and get some clarification on something that isn't available in the FAQ. And even if they don't get give you an answer in real time. At least maybe you can get that question prioritized. So yeah, I'd keep an eye out for maybe other presentations. But I think basically it's going to be the information that's available is probably what's going to be available until April 8th. And then when April 8th comes, I think a lot more will be available. So I'm just trying to save people the frustration of looking for answers that they're just not going to get. And anyone who tries to give you a full answer on this program, not like they're misleading you, but they just, they might be making an assumption based on either the American Rescue Plan Act or the Notice of Award. But those kind of are the documents that lead to the policies and procedures. And until the policies and procedures are in place, those can only kind of get you so far. So check out the website, check out the FAQs, sign up for the portal. You can also go to sba.gov/updates if you want to sign up for the e-newsletter. And that's more general SBA updates. So you'll get some PPP stuff, some IDLE stuff, some Women's History Month stuff this month. So that's kind of everything that's not SVOG specific, but when a big SVOG announcement happens, it'll go out through that newsletter as well.
It's been really great information. Thank you, Marlo, for sharing all of that. The one thing that I wanted to mention is that there are some requirements leading up to this, which Marlo had talked about earlier, the SAM, as well as the availability of DUNS numbers. Both of those are things, if you haven't already done, sorry, we're repeating myself, DUNS number and done, but you may want to look into that more and make sure that you're ahead of that, because in some cases the process for that takes a little while. And so that's something that you'll want to be looking at. Also, as Marlo mentioned, there are local partners who can be of assistance to you. SCORE and the SBDC and A New America, which is our local women's center, all are in a position to be able to offer you advice in working through these things. If you're concerned about the differences between things or you're trying to figure out the numbers, in many cases, they can help you with those kinds of examinations as well. And even if it turns out that you don't need them for this specific project, they are a great resource, and they are there offering free counseling and advice, and they would be very pleased to help you work through this and other kinds of issues that you might be facing, potentially in terms of increasing your revenue through other channels or decreasing your costs in order to make sure that you're maintaining your forward momentum. There is one final question. It looks to me as though that may be, again, a repeat of the question about the time frame on that. It says, that is to say, whether the quarterly versus annual in terms of specific dates. In determining the 90 or 70%, do you calculate 04-19 to 12-19 versus 04-20 to 12-20? Is that something you can offer insights into, or is that getting...
Yeah, I mean, I don't like sounding like a broken record, but I'll refer you back to the FAQs. I'm not sure if it's just a year-over-year comparison or a quarterly comparison to get to those numbers. Basically, the information that I have on the slide, which isn't helpful because it doesn't answer the question, is that entities that suffered a 90% or greater revenue loss between April 2020 through December 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But right, that doesn't say, is that April 2020 to December 2020 versus 19, or is that some other time period that you could use to do that calculation? So I would refer you to the frequently asked questions, which may or may not include the answer.
Well, it does seem like there's a difference in what you were describing in terms of this range, these date ranges. It seems different than with the 25% where they're saying this quarter to that quarter. And the comparison of the quarterly revenue, which suggests that if you have a conversation with the folks at SBDC or SCORE, they'll be able to help you look at that more carefully to evaluate how that aligns with the regulations as well.
Yeah, for the third priority group, it's entities that suffered a 25% or greater earned revenue loss between one quarter of 2019 and the corresponding quarter of 2020. So yeah, the calculations aren't even necessarily the same between priority groups.
Right. Well, Marlo, once again, thank you so much for all your work on this. We really appreciate the fact that the SBA has stepped up in such a huge way. I know it's not always voluntary when they heap more, here, can you handle this grant? But you guys have been doing a great job at making it possible for people to get access to the well, millions and billions of dollars that have been
Hundreds
flowing.
of billions.
Yeah, hundreds of billions that have been flowing through SBA. So we appreciate all the work that you and the other institutions like SCORE, SBDC, the New America Center are offering to the small business world, because there's a lot of assistance out there. It isn't always possible to get all of it, but many pieces of it are available to the businesses that apply and are savvy, which clearly the people who are attending this meeting are, because they're finding out about it as early as they can. Hopefully they'll be engaged with the portals so that they get the early notification, and they'll take advantage of some of those other pieces of assistance. And we wouldn't have information about this except for you, Marlo. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done. Before we conclude this webinar, let me ask if you would be so kind as, when it ends, to fill out the accompanying survey that helps us understand a little bit more about the types of webinars that we should be offering, and the information that how we're doing in terms of delivering information to you. So if you could complete that, that would be very much appreciated. And with that, seeing no other questions, I think we'll call this meeting adjourned, so to speak. Thanks again, Marlo, and thank you to all the attendees for coming. Bye.